Hi-fi. What is hi-fi? Hi-fi is simply a sound wave carried through an electrical current.
Recently, I reached my hi-fi endgame.
But this is not just good. This is insanely good, right?
But my hi-fi endgame is different than your hi-fi endgame, or her hi-fi endgame, or the cameraman's hi-fi endgame. But the good news is I'm here to share some logic and some experiences that I've learned in time to help me reach the end game.
Yeah, I think this is like end game result, right?
You can do it too. Stick around. You could build a pair of these for under $1,000.
So I recently built my 8th pair of open baffles, and I realized that my buddy Thomas, the YouTube reviewer, had never listened to any of my open baffle versions. So when he called me and said, "Do you want to listen to my new solid-state amplifier?" I said, "Sure, under one condition, if you listen to my latest open baffle speakers." So he did. How was it?
It's jaw-dropping, seriously. I was not expecting this. Not even close, man. You can really imagine the stage. This is worth more than $1,000, man. I'm sorry, but it's beyond ridiculous.
So as you can see, his reaction was really positive, and actually I was very surprised. I wasn't expecting him to actually react that way. Could be because his expectations were low, maybe. Maybe that's why he never bothered to even come and ask to listen to any of the previous versions. I don't think he was putting too much hope or hype or expectations to himself as to the performance that he would hear. But the conversation that followed, I find is pretty interesting. And so anyways, have a listen to this conversation.
It sounds real, right? But what gives it that realism? Like, because when I listen to this, I don't hear this at my place.
Well, one thing, and I'm recording ourselves now, just in case. This might be a fun conversation to come back to.
Yeah.
It's not just the speakers you're hearing too, man.
Yeah.
Like, I'll go grab a Yamaha receiver and plug them on a Yamaha receiver and you're gonna vomit.
Mm.
Like, there's a combination of everything happening here. What's impressive about these speakers is like what they cost,
Yeah.
and that they're handmade by someone like me who's not even a carpenter, is that they're capable enough of reproducing what's coming out of all this.
Look, these single drivers, like, we listen to multi-variational radio, right? And
Yeah.
every time it's like, man, it's good, it's whatever. But this is not just good. This is insanely good, right? And the secret is just how far you place the bass driver away from the, like, this is the biggest difference I found is where you're placing the bass driver, okay? Mm-hmm. Of course, you can argue, okay, you adjust the Class D amp and the 211 amp,
Yes,
so that it balances. Could be, whatever, okay? But I will argue against that because your old system, I don't care how you do it, you're not going to get this result.
Oh no, it's almost like a scientific experiment almost, right? That's what's hard. Like, everyone that comes down and says, "Oh, what do I need to get?" I'm like, man, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's it. And
You need to go through the journey to get to this.
and to get this kind of result with $1,000, right?
Yeah.
Like, you'll never see a system like this in a store.
No.
Where you have two separate, right?
Yeah.
And most people will probably not even think of doing it this way. So they'll never get this, whoa, what the hell just happened here, you know? As I said, the vocals are just out of this world. And the bass and that hollowness of that drum,
I know,
the
that's
first second click, I'm like, shit, this just beat every single system at my home. Right? I mean,
yeah, but there's things that it doesn't do well either. Like,
well, I don't know.
I'm listening to things, like, I'm showing you things that sound really great. Like, if we play Wonder Woman soundtrack, the flaws are going to start coming out.
Okay,
Massively.
maybe.
Of course, because you have one driver that's doing all the work from 100 hertz and up, all of it.
Yeah.
So naturally, when it comes time to actually maintain the decay, the attack for 50 instruments, it starts to struggle. And it's not because it's just necessarily there's one driver in the baffle. When you have a three-way, if I had open baffles in a three-way, they'll handle big orchestral, complex orchestral, no problem. Or even if I had a coaxial driver instead of a full range. Coaxial is really 2-in-1. There's a tweeter that's surrounded by a mid-range and lower frequency driver. Completely different. It looks like a full range driver like this, but it's not the same thing.
Correct.
And that sounds amazing in orchestral. But what these do better than most other combination is when you have a 1, 2, or 3-piece set of a singer, a guitar, a drum, maybe a bass, a stand-up bass, like
Yeah. I think
that,
so. Yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah, I think this is like endgame result, right? Because, you know, there's a lot of time when I go listen to the Folk House Opera 2 at Mr. Cantor. It's impressive, right?
It's very impressive.
You know, precision, detail, but never once did I had this feeling where I sit down where I hear the drums like this. Neither the vocal like this. Like, holy shit, this is some real, the realism is off the charts, right? That vocal chord, man, it's like, it's insane.
Yeah, it draws you in.
And for people who listen to just mostly this kind of music, like me, vocal. See, I like audiophile vocal recording.
Yeah.
This is it. I don't need more than this. I am done, man, with this. $1,000. What the hell?
I know.
Shit.
So if you clicked on this video, it's probably because you have a hi-fi rig and you want better sound. We all do. And we think that that means we should get better gear. Well, it's true. So go get better gear. You fucking poor bastard. But if you're buying better gear just to treat symptoms, odds are you're living exactly what all audiophiles go through, but you're falling in to the vicious cycle of hi-fi side effects. Some think the speakers are the most important. Well, if your speakers can't keep up with the rest of your system, sure, makes sense. Speakers are very important. Others think the amplifier is the most important. But if you think of your speakers as a race car and the amplifier is the driver of the race car, sure, without a good driver, your race car is never going to win a race. So I get it. Some others actually think that the source is the most important part of your hi-fi rig. You know, the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. So there's truth to all of these. So what do I think? Well, I assume you want to know what I think, otherwise you wouldn't have clicked on this thumbnail. Or not, you're just bored and you're trying to get away from the kids at the bathroom. Admit it, you're sitting on the shitter right now with your tablet and you're watching my YouTube videos. And if that's the case, sure, that's fine too. So what do I think about all this? Is it the speakers the most important? Is it the amplifier the most important? Is it the pre-amplifier the most important? Everyone's got their opinions. I believe that if we think of hi-fi in those terms, I think we're limiting ourselves. I do. And I think we're limiting ourselves to a point where we're even falling into these never-ending rabbit holes or vicious cycles of hi-fi upgrade side effects. Let me use a little analogy here to what I mean by side effects. If you have a symptom like a headache or sore throat, a cough, you can take medicine or a pill to treat this symptom. But oftentimes, that medicine or that pill has a side effect. Well, for those of you that have upgraded components in your hi-fi rig over time, you know as well as I do that if you change a component in your hi-fi rig, oftentimes there's a side effect. When have you changed an amp trying to increase one thing, but in the process it decreased another? Or it introduced a new factor that you didn't have before? Happens to all of us. I really believe that hi-fi has to be looked at as a whole. Your whole system, including your room, matters. That's the outcome, not individual components. It's the whole chain.
before I get started with this explanation, I'm going to make a few statements. I know that the source is crucial. I also know that if you spend a huge amount of money on speakers and room treatment, that the potential for your hi-fi performance will be super high. But I also know that in this process, if you neglect the amplifier, performance in the end, not going to be endgame. So you kind of see the importance of the relationship between everything. So if you look on screen here, okay, this is just in terms of the impact on sonic performance, what I'm talking about right now. Just the impact. Ignore the reverse triangle in the back, or the funnel, or don't worry about the shape in the back, how wide it's a triangle pointing down. Don't worry about that. So let's just look at the layers. You have the power and data layers. And I represented my system here. So on the power and data, I have dedicated circuits, separate outlets. Both are quality outlets, like they're good outlets. They're not, $5 outlets from Home Depot. They're outlets with good contact and good strong connections. So on one of these quality outlets, I have my Puritan Psm156 that is hooked up to it, and I have another set of quality outlets that I hook up my amplifiers. So my Melody 211 amp or the Crown XLS amp. I'm not mentioning my 300B monoblocks here just for the sake of space. So in the Puritan 156, I have my streamer, I have my digital reclocker, I have my DAC. My DAC has an external clock which is battery powered. So while it's charging, it's plugged into one of the wall outlets, but while I'm listening, it's not plugged into any outlet. Then I also have my super rectifier plugged into the Puritan, and I have my Melody preamp that is hooked into the Puritan. So layers, power and data, source, preamp and amplification layer, speakers, which I have 2 open baffles going. Right now for this example, I have the F15 in one open baffle from 70 hertz to 12 kilohertz, and I have the W15s in an open baffle on their own in the corners from 30 hertz to 90 hertz. So this is the speaker layer, and then you have your room acoustics. Now it's important to understand, and I learned this the hard way, it was very costly over the years, is if I look in terms of impact on these layers, what has the biggest impact on what I hear or what you hear, regardless of what components are in these layers? Which of these layers has the biggest sonic impact to our ears? The biggest impact of all is the room, is the acoustics in the room. If I were able to grab you and sit you into a different room blindfolded and do a blind A/B test for you to tell me if you're in room A or room B, you would never fail, because the sound is drastically different when you change rooms. The second most impactful layer in your system is your speakers. It is hard to fail a blind A/B test by changing speakers. Is this speaker A or speaker B? The impact is very different. It's very audible. As we move up the layers, things start to still have an impact. You can tell an impact that an amplifier has. You can tell a sonic impact that a pre-amplifier has. However, in this layer, depending on the context, depending on what's going on, not everybody will pass a blind A/B test between changing amps. Experienced people usually will. Otherwise, not always. Not always. And then you have the source, which I agree is one of the most critical components of our system. But how many times have you even seen videos online of people doing blind A/B tests of different DACs or different phono stages or different turntables, and they can't always tell the difference? And then power and data. Can you do a blind test and know every time if you just change the type of outlets, whether you're using a dedicated circuit or non-dedicated circuit, or if you're using a power filtration like the Puritan Psm156, it's not always guaranteed you're going to hear the difference in a blind A/B test. You will if the potential of each of these layers doesn't get strangled by the limitations of the next layer. Meaning, if your potential for clean power is really high, like you don't just have dedicated circuits, you have a dedicated panel, you have even an isolated ground, and then you have quality outlets, and you have something of quality like a Puritan Psm156 or a really expensive power plant, your potential for power and data is through the roof high, very high. But will that potential get filled as you go down the layers? So you go down to your DAC. You could have everything I just described, but then you'll slap a cheap DAC that's very noisy and has a terrible analog output stage. You already started to negate the potential that you got from your data. As you move down, same thing with pre-amplification. You could have high performing preamp and amplifier. It depends on what limits you're imposing. As you go down, same thing with your speakers. But why I'm saying this is that once you understand the impacts, what has the greatest impact, it doesn't mean that one thing's more important than the other. I'm just talking about impacts. If you change rooms, it's possible that your entire system might no longer be satisfactory. You might not like your system if you change rooms. It's a possibility. If you change your speakers because you want to treat a symptom, because you want something to sound better, or you're looking for better mid-range, you're looking for better bass, there is a chance that by changing your speakers, you might not be satisfied with your type of amplification or preamplification anymore. Just like you might not be satisfied with the source that you have. Because the impact a speaker has can be life-changing for your system, just like the room. And as you move up these layers, the way I'm doing now, the smaller the impact is. Don't get me wrong. And I'm going to keep the next part for the next video in the series. And that is to try to understand the relationship between the potential versus the limitations.
So I'm sharing you this concept because for me, this was an important thing to learn to help me bring components together and find that synergy. It's a lot of trial and error. As good as you can be at reading specs, until you hear, it's hard to tell. This helps me make much better decisions with my hi-fi gear.